Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. What is the state of the economy today? How much damage will the virus and the lockdown do? And what are the steps that are necessary to remedy and rectify the situation? Those are three key issues I shall raise today with Professor of Economics at the Indira Gandhi Institute of Development Research and a member of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council, Ashima Goyal. Professor Goyal, let's start with the state of the economy. There is a view that in June, we saw what are called green shoots emerging because of improvements in electricity generation, consumption of petroleum products, and an increase in revenue earning freight traffic on the railways. Alongside, there was also a certain rebound in FMCG goods, tractor sales, two-wheeler sales. Do you believe those were genuine green shoots, or is that an overinterpretation?
Well, the lockdown created an absolute shutdown of economic activity. So when that was reversed in June, then there would be a recovery. We saw that. So my own belief is that the lockdown was responsible more for shutting down the economy than the virus itself was. But the PMI even today, although the reversal has plateaued, the PMI even today is very near. It was 47 in June, it's 46 now in July. So manufacturing is continuing at a higher level, but it's plateaued. It's not recovered to its earlier level. So the problem, I think, is that now since the virus is spreading, a lot of states are imposing selective lockdowns, and that is creating some disruption of supply chains. But otherwise, I think that people are quite resilient in India, and they are willing to work, and they have to because of our poverty levels.
Absolutely. But you mentioned, interestingly, the marginal difference in PMI between June and July. Do you subscribe to the belief that has also been in all the pink papers that whatever signs of growth we saw in June have lost momentum in July, possibly because of the spate of mini and regional lockdowns that have happened? Do you subscribe to that belief?
I think there could be other factors also. Because we'll see recovery after the lockdown, but the virus also has some effect, and since it's spreading, you won't see full recovery. But that said, I think a lot of these measures, it's like whatever you measure, you think is real, but actually the reality can be very different. So there are a lot of activities that are not measured. For example, you measure mobility when you see mobility is much lower. Obviously, since there are different phases of lockdown, mobility will be lower. But people substitute by consuming home services. For example, they're not going to restaurants, but they'll have home delivery of food. And that perhaps is not measured as much. So people substitute. People are still there. They're consuming, and essentials at least. We never saw that decline in FMCG, fast-moving consumer goods, because people continue to consume. Okay. They're going to the shops less.
So there's a sense in which the pattern of consumption has altered. Home consumption rather than shopping. But let me then ask you this. How genuine is either the recovery in June, and how worrying is the plateauing of that recovery in July? Or is it too early to tell? Either way.
I think the recovery is genuine. When the lockdown was lifted, the absolute restraints on many kinds of industry, although essentials had been continuing even during the lockdown, but other restraints were lifted. So those industries would recover, would start producing. But then you have a certain set that are affected badly, such as hospitality or airlines or travel, where you will not see the same level of recovery. And there's a third set, which is the substitution. Although some industries are going to do badly, others have recovered, but a third set is actually doing better. And among that is pharmaceuticals, then IT, telecom, we knew because of that AGR dues, telecom was in a lot of trouble. They are seeing some traction because people are using mobiles, internet more now since they can't travel as much, right? So they're actually, and another industry which was doing very badly is autos. We knew that the slowdown before COVID was triggered by a collapse. I mean, one of the major manifestations was a collapse in auto sales. But now, since people are scared of using public transport and it's not functioning as well, there's a jump in demand for small cars. So Maruti, they've been reporting that there's something of a turnaround, right? So that is why I say that we should never exaggerate the impact of shocks. Because now it's a 2 trillion economy, we are quite diversified. So for any shock,
this is a very interesting answer, that different parts of the economy are behaving differently. There are some areas where substitution has helped, and so online selling is doing better. There are other areas which are doing better, like pharmaceuticals, IT, telecom, because people sitting at home need this. But there are also areas like hospitality, airline travel that have slumped.
And then there are sectors like agriculture, which is an essential growth.
I'll come to agriculture in a moment's time, because I think it's an interesting sector. But at this moment, to sum up what we've discussed, how would you then describe the nature of the recovery that we're seeing? I noticed that, for instance, the Secretary of Economic Affairs, Tarun Bajaj, told FICCI on the 24th, and I'm quoting him, June and July have been more promising than we initially thought. I am expecting a V-shaped recovery. But 3 days later, while talking to the Business Standard, he said the V-shape will come over a whole year. And suddenly it seemed to me that the V was becoming a U. How would you characterize the recovery? Is it V, is it U, or is there some other alphabet that you would prefer?
I think that we saw a lot of forecasts immediately when COVID hit, which talked about 20-30% fall and -5 over the whole year, right? Now, there was a simulation exercise done by NCAR, where they did a number of, you can't really, there's just too many uncertainties to really be able to predict this. But in their model, they put in if supply bottlenecks are resolved. Because this shock was a supply and demand shock. Initially, supply was shut down while demand for at least essentials remained. Then you saw some recovery in supply. Then demand becomes the constraint. So you would think that you need a demand stimulus. Now people are scared, they're saving, precautionary savings go up. But then what has happened are these mini lockdowns, which are again perhaps affecting supply. But I don't think they are as troublesome as a nationwide lockdown, because people find ways around it. In a large country, you can find supply alternatives if you are a nationwide organization.
But are you suggesting, Professor Goyal, that rather than characterize the lockdown in terms of alphabets like V and U, it's more likely to be stop-start? Different factors will give it impetus, different factors will obstruct it. Whether those different factors are lockdowns or whether there are other conditions, it's more likely to be stop-start than V or U.
Yes, so we saw something like a V in June, and there was a sharp recovery, from absolute zero in some sectors to pretty good. And there is a V, say, in say, telecom or in cars or something, right, compared to where they earlier were. But some industries it's going to be a reverse L. I mean, nobody's going to go to restaurants, they're locked down. But even they are substituting towards home delivery. I believe some airlines were going into cargo and Indigo, so keeping some cash flows going. So people are innovative, and in India we are used to difficulties and to working around them.
Yes, absolutely. But there's one particular uncertainty on the horizon that is getting worse. And I want to ask you how that uncertainty will impact on the sort of recovery we're witnessing. I'm talking about the escalating COVID crisis, which seems to be, from the newspapers, getting worse every day. We've now crossed 1.75 million cases. We're growing at about 52, 53,000 a day. Epidemiologists are forecasting a total of 100 million cases, both reported and undetected by the end of August, perhaps 200 million by the end of September. What sort of impact will this have on the type of recovery we're seeing?
Yes, Karan, right at the beginning in March, there were these epidemiologist reports, which forecasted millions, and because given the size of our population. So I think we must recognize that the lockdown was required at that stage, and it did help to flatten the curve. And because of our, more than billion population, the absolute numbers are always going to be large. So it's much, and given our congestion and poverty, and given that we are a large economy where you cannot stop travel, small economies like Taiwan and Singapore and so on can monitor people coming in and quarantine them more effectively than we can in a country like India. So that initial lockdown helped ramp up some medical facilities.
Absolutely. But Professor Goyal, I'm not talking about the benefit of the lockdown initially. I'm not talking about what impact will the escalating virus have on the recovery that's taking place.
No, yes. So I just want to talk about that escalation, that it is not as serious as it seems when you look at it in absolute numbers, that we did flatten the curve initially, that it could, because this disease is very, very infectious. So you had to sort of break connections between people to prevent the spread. Then after that, but given our poverty, we cannot continue with lockdowns forever. So I think we did a very, very good thing in terms of gradual unlock. Unlike the US, where they moved from lockdown to total unlock, and then you've seen these very rapid spikes. Yeah. But in India, we've had some success stories like Bombay, Delhi, even Chennai now. There is some flattening of the curve even immediately after the unlock, there was a rise.
But the opposite is also true. The disease is growing in Andhra, it's growing in Telangana, it's growing in UP, Bihar, Gujarat. And remember, some of those areas, UP and Bihar in particular, are areas where our health services are fragile, tenuous. So this is why I ask, what impact will this growing, escalating crisis have on whatever recovery we're seeing? Whether it's V, U, L, there is recovery taking place in different sectors. What impact will this crisis have on it? Will it impact confidence?
Since we have some time, can I just go into the story of how I see COVID spreading and how it is? Because now see, why did it hit the big metropolises first? Because we have the greatest links abroad, largest number of cases coming from outside that spread it in these cities. Yeah. And then you had the lockdown, and I don't know, I know that our health infrastructure is poor, that's why you needed it, but it presumably gave states time to ramp up some medical facilities. Maybe many of them did not do it. And that was the issue of the migrants, that became a big story here. The plague in Bombay in 1896, that spread from some, fleas that came in a ship from Hong Kong to Bombay. This panic, migrants went in the interior and they spread it all over India. And Karan, it lasted for 15 years until Afghan produced a vaccine.
And that could be today. But that could be happening with COVID too, the returning migrants.
Yeah, so that is what I'm talking. That is why I'm saying, because these migrants, they have taken help spread the disease into the interiors. They panicked because they had no work and the lockdowns were being extended. So, but the states had time. They had time to presumably quarantine, take some care. There's a student of mine who's in a remote village in Bihar. He comes from there and he's there with his parents. He's on the border of Nepal. I asked him, did people quarantine these returning migrants? He said, yes, they were put in a school, but their houses were very close, so they would just go,
This is why I asked Professor Goyal, what impact will this escalating crisis have on the nature of recovery we're witnessing? Will it impede?
So let me say, we've had some lessons from, but after these migrants left, we have succeeded in Bombay and Delhi. Delhi, immediate list, more universal testing and quarantining, etc. After it was escalating, so we have learned some lessons now within the country on how to deal with this.
So
there's a full lockdown.
So are you saying, therefore, this escalating health crisis will not have an impact on the recovery we're seeing? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying it will have some recovery, but not as serious as it looks in absolute numbers. Because we have learned the lesson, but states don't seem to have internalized it. Maybe they'll take some states are acting in arbitrary ways. The lesson we have learned is that you don't need to lock down fully as long as you test, isolate, quarantine, do social distancing, using masks, hygiene, etc. You can
Except,
continue to work.
except that lesson hasn't been learned by states, and states are periodically and regularly locking down in a strange and haphazard way. Let me then put this:
Right.
if you say that the escalating crisis will not have a damaging impact on the recovery we're witnessing, how much confidence do you get from the performance of agriculture? Agriculture has shown remarkable resilience. We had a bumper Rabi harvest. The newspapers are reporting that the area under cultivation for Kharif is perhaps 14% more than last year. The finance minister has gone on record, and I'll quote her: "We can clearly see agriculture driving the revival." And my question is, given that agriculture is only 15% of GDP, how much can it drive it?
Well, it is one source of demand for FMCG. One reason they're doing well is tractors is a demand. So to that extent, but also when you have a good crop and government procurement operations have been ramped up, so a lot of money has gone into rural areas, and they are able to spend. So you have one sector at least, and then one advantage rural areas have, despite poor health infrastructure, etc., is that they have space, unlike cities. There's not so much congestion, which really spreads the infection very fast. So, and there is a lot of awareness now about this disease, and people are presumably taking a little bit of care.
Do you
So,
believe that rural demand can sufficiently boost FMCG, tractors, fertilizers to make a decisive impact on economic growth? Or will this be marginal and peripheral?
it will have, I would say, middling. It won't be marginal, it won't be decisive, but it will have some positive effect.
Middling and
Also remember that although it's 15%, just say agricultural produce, but there's 70% of population, and those migrants have gone back. There's huge spending on MG and Arita, you know. So in terms of purchasing power, they have demand for all sorts of kind of consumer goods.
Okay.
So the impact on demand is larger than their contribution to GDP.
Let me then, against the background of everything we've discussed, ask you, what sort of impact do you think the virus and the lockdowns will have on economic growth this full year? The State Bank of India has estimated that the economy could contract by 6.8%. The ratings agency ICRA says it could contract by 9.5%. The former chief statistician Pranab Sen has said it might contract by as much as 12.5%. What's your sense? What's your sense of how much the economy could contract over this full financial year?
See, Karan, I'm not a business analyst or a forecaster. I find that they and the media also really lives on the latest data and forecast, because that drives business decisions and so on. So I like to sort of more understand where these forecasts are coming from. So I'll give you two reasons. One reason I think they can be exaggerated. I was talking to a business economist recently, an analyst, and she was saying that she's fed up of these forecasts. They make them themselves because they have to keep revising them so frequently. Every time some things are changing, there's a lot of uncertainty. So these forecasts are changing all the time. Yeah. But she was saying they have some value because they are meant to enable you to take action. Now, there also I have a problem because, when there is sort of herd mentality, when somebody, say the first person to panic says -5%, the second person, everybody, then you're pushing for more action, and you're saying that unless this happens, things will get really bad, right? And you are overreacting. There's a panic element. Yeah. So let me just come to one forecast from NCAER, where they have put in their model. I was talking about this earlier, that that supply bottlenecks are resolved. And then their model gives a growth rate of 1.3% for the year. yeah, against all these minuses. But I think markets are like, bad news has a greater impact, and that becomes viral, and more people
Can I
are
ask you
saying
this,
this.
Professor Goyal? What's
Yeah.
your hunch? You are not just a professor of economics, you're also a member of the Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council. People will be listening to you much more intently. What's your hunch? Are we going
Actually,
to see,
let
are
me
we going
say
to
here,
see growth? Are we going to see growth this year? You quoted the NCAER figure of 1.3% growth. Is that what you believe will be the outcome? 1% growth?
let me say over here, I should have said at the beginning that these are my personal views. They have nothing to do with any government or any other body I'm associated with.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But it's your
So,
personal views I'm interested in. That's why I ask, what is your
so
hunch? Will the
yeah, no,
economy
this is
grow?
not what the government thinks. Yeah.
No, but do you believe?
I say that there is too much uncertainty. I have a regular monthly column in the HBL, in the business line. And last month I had talked about this NCAR, after the June figures, the recovery that we saw there. So now I'm a little concerned about these, states locking down and the spread of the virus. There I had said that uncertainties because of the spread of COVID. So we have too many uncertainties, you know. So if we can replicate the successes in Bombay and Delhi, in Bangalore, Chennai, and Pune, and if we see, some more understanding from states on what is it that works and what doesn't, so that supply is allowed to work unhindered.
Can I
Then,
interrupt? I hate interrupting, but are you saying that in June, when you wrote your column, you believed that the NCAER figure of 1.3% growth, I emphasize its growth, was about right. But now there is too much uncertainty, both because of the states locking down and because of the increasing spread of the virus. So now, today, you don't think 1.3% growth is easily achievable?
yes, because that was conditional on no supply bottlenecks, the supply bottlenecks being removed and some sort of demand stimulus. Yeah. So now I think that the demand stimulus, the government is open to more intervention, to more packages. They've had a series of packages starting with the Reserve Bank. But demand will not work if shops are not open, if people can't, if there are still supply bottlenecks. So
So
the
now,
problem
are you
is,
looking at negative growth? Now, does negative growth for the year look more likely?
I would say that, see, then there is another. I would say that I'm more worried now. In the sense, I think that a negative growth is more likely at this stage, but there are a lot of uncertainties still, and we could see a turnaround in the next few months. As I said, the people are substituting. There's some industries doing better. People can't go to restaurants, they're booking home delivery of food at home, and so on. So certain activities will continue and grow. And I think we have a great advantage in terms of digital and IT.
Can I put to
Where,
you?
yeah.
Can I put to you a thought that could be occurring to the audience as they hear you? You're saying, and I'm quoting your words, that you are more worried now. Negative growth looks more likely, but there could still be a turnaround. Some
Right.
people hearing you might say, is she being over optimistic? Everyone else is talking about negative growth between 5 and perhaps 12%. Even some of your former colleagues on the PMAEC, Ratin Roy, said that he believed that in the worst case scenario, nominal growth could fall by 17%, which he estimated meant real growth falling around somewhere 11-12%. You still see a possibility of positive growth, and
Let me just talk about something else, which is that there are some literature in economics, where they study the impact of a war or earthquake on economic activity. So what typically happens in such a case is that there's a large destruction of capital, houses or bombing, etc. And then so this is a real shock. And after that, there is normally a V-shaped recovery and very rapid growth. Why? Because two conditions. One, human capital should not be relatively intact, should be more intact than physical capital. People are there to work. Second, governments spend a lot to rebuild, So demand rises and people are resilient. They want to make up, they want to get back. Okay, so as soon as there's a possibility. Now, in this case, the uncertainty is because of this virus, how much it's going to spread, how much it's going to incapacitate people.
And it's
but
a
see,
huge
the other thing in India,
it's a
yeah,
huge
but the other thing, yeah. But the other thing in India is that our mortality rate is pretty low
Can
compared
I
to most
interrupt you there?
countries.
Forgive me. Our mortality rate is pretty low, but I'm not sure we're calculating it correctly. And some of the world's best epidemiologists have questioned both the way we reach the numerator and the way we reach the denominator. Since neither of us are epidemiologists, let's not get into that debate. I think we would simply distract the audience. All I'm signaling is that some of the world's top epidemiologists have serious questions about A, the way India calculates mortality, and B, how much comfort it should take from that. But leave that aside. I want to move on, but let me just, for the sake of the audience, ask you this. You're framing the likely outcome between the possibility of negative growth and the possibility of positive. Can you give some sense of marker at either end? If it's positive, are we talking of 2-3% or more? If it's negative, is it 2-3% or more? Give me some sense of marker.
It would be marginally positive because you'll have some industries that are negatively affected, and you'll have other industries that are doing better. Yeah. But another reason I say this is, because I like to give reasons for my position. Another reason is, there's a widespread perception that India was doing very badly. It was in a slowdown which was accumulating, and then COVID hit, so things are bound to get worse. But if you look at this last quarter, the January, February, March quarter, where data has come in, where the figures have come in for growth, if you look at high frequency data in February, there was a turnaround. Things were looking up. Even export growth had risen, And then in March, COVID hit. So if you take the quarter as a whole, it's like growth was successively falling through the past year. Okay. And things were getting worse. Yeah. And why was there a turnaround? I believe I have a lot of research papers and so on that go into this, that we had a really extreme monetary and financial conditions tightening. Okay. Since 2018, when the NBFC crisis happened, then there were outflows and interest rates were raised, and you had some recovery in 2017 that turned into a slump. Investment fell again in 2018. Now in 2019, there was a reversal of this, okay? The new governor came in, then you had a relaxation in liquidity conditions. Even aggregate liquidity had been tightened. And that the financial sector was, and then the other perception is the financial sector is in a very bad condition.
Professor Goyal, I don't want your lay audience to get lost in the details, because you're an expert and you're very erudite, but your lay audience may not be able to follow the argument quite as closely as you are laying it out. Let me, for their sake, put this to you. Have I summed you up correctly when I say your position is that at the end of this financial year, we'll either have marginal growth or marginal shrinking, but at either end, it will be marginal. Is that correct?
Yes. Okay. But let me just say that I think the financial sector was also recovering. Public sector banks, net NPAs had fallen to low levels. People say that our financial system is broken, therefore we can't.
No, forgive me. I don't want to interrupt, but the finance stability report of the RBI released last week actually alerted us to the possibility that NFAs could increase to 14.7%. In fact, two major bankers, Deepak Parekh and Uday Kotak, have publicly told the government don't extend the moratorium. The chairman of SBI, Rajneesh Kumar, has pointed out to the Financial Times that the stress in sectors like hospitality, airlines, and hotels will have a damaging impact on public sector banks. So there's actually great concern at the moment about the financial sector.
I agree that, but where were they starting from? The starting position, was it one where things were very bad? Then if there's another shock, things get even worse. I'm saying that they're starting from a position where there was some recovery, where NPAs had gone down. So there will be some rise with this crisis, but it will not be making bad things worse. It will be making okay things a
In
bit
other words,
worse. That is my point.
the starting point you're saying is not as bad as people assume. We did not have an
Yes.
economy that was dipping and collapsing before COVID. It was
Right.
actually recovering. And that's where you
Right.
differ from the conventional view of most economists. Most economists seem to believe
Right.
we were sliding downhill. COVID will
Right.
accelerate the slide. You're saying actually we were improving and recovering. COVID will
Right.
damage the recovery, but the slide as a result won't be as bad. So let me then
Yes,
once again for the
absolutely.
last time ask you, what are the parameters between which we could grow or decline? Just give me some sense of figure because audiences can understand that easily. If it's moderate marginal growth, is it 1.5%? If it's moderate marginal decline, is it 1.5%? Give me some sense of figure.
Well, I would say 1% positive growth or -3% negative, between in that range.
That's perfectly clear. The range will be between +1% and -3%. Let me then put this to you, because we're coming to the end of this interview. The government says, taken all together, they put in a stimulus which they calculate is 20.9 lakh crore. Every analyst has pointed out that the fiscal stimulus is barely 1 or 1.2% of GDP. And my question is, do you believe personally we need more fiscal stimulus? And if the answer is yes, how much and how soon?
Yeah, again, can I give a slightly long answer to
Of
this?
course, of course.
So I think that analysts are making a mistake when they say that the fiscal stimulus is only 1%. I've written about this in my HBR column also, because at the same time as they say 1% stimulus, they say that the fiscal deficit is likely to be 10%, center plus states. Now, as a macroeconomist, you know that the demand stimulus is the excess of expenditure over taxes. The government is spending without getting taxes because taxes fall in a slump. Then it is spending so much more. Very latest data shows that the fiscal deficit, the budgeted fiscal deficit, is already 83%. Just in the first quarter, they've already reached 83%. So they already, because just as I said, in a war, a government spends on reconstruction. Now they're spending on health expenditure, which is a kind of, they're putting money into the economy. They are spending. So there is a demand stimulus, which is much larger than 1% of GDP. I think the problem was that the May package announced an additional fiscal stimulus of 1%, and people took that to mean that's the whole fiscal stimulus.
Can I ask
That's
you,
not true.
when you say that demand stimulus is much more than 1%, what do you estimate it at?
Well, the recent estimates put the fiscal deficit is, instead of the 3 point something it was supposed to be, it's going to be 7, others say 10, right? So I would say that they're spending about, say, 4% of GDP already.
So you believe that the fiscal stimulus delivered by the government is 4% of GDP?
No, the additional spending over revenues, while the other parts of that package, the agricultural reforms and the credit warranties, this is also very important because of where we were coming from. Since banks were risk averse, they're not lending, excess liquidity was sitting there. So if the government warranties takes first loss, then the banks are willing to lend. Then that is a stimulus.
So you're saying
That's
that
not counted in this
you're saying the additional spending by the government amounts to a fiscal stimulus of 4% of GDP. This also means that practically everyone else has calculated it wrongly.
Yes, I think so.
You agree?
Yes.
Can I ask you one question? What is it that you think they've missed? If you're so certain it's 4% and they're all convinced it's 1%, what have they missed?
That is what I'm saying. This May package said that announced an additional spend. It was announced as a 10 lakh crore package. And out of that, it turned out that 4 lakh crores was the excess liquidity the RBI had created. Another few lakh crores was the warranty for SME borrowing. While only 1 crore was actual spending, where the government is going out and spend, while only 1 lakh crore or 1% of GDP was actual spending, the government goes out and spends. So this was taken as the fiscal stimulus. But see, the government's fiscal deficit is 4%, was budgeted, was around between 3 and 4, and they've already reached 83% of that. So that means they've already spent that 3% of GDP plus this 1%, that's 4%, not 1% of GDP, in addition to the loans going out and so on, which is also a stimulus.
Okay, let me then put this to you. Do you believe today, given the uncertainty of the way the virus is behaving, and given the fact that states are resorting to pretty haphazard lockdowns, do you believe we need additional fiscal stimulus?
Yes, I think so. But we have a problem in that we have 1 billion plus people, and the kind of in the West they're spending 20-30% of GDP as a stimulus. They're giving income support, and they say that this is for rescue, and there'll be more spending for recovery. Now, given our deficit and per capita income levels, we cannot afford, and our population numbers, we cannot afford this kind of thing. So our spending has to be made in a measured way, which is most effective. The government spends today, everybody is asking because everybody is hurt. How do you choose among all this? Whom do you spend on? Who do you give money to? And if you give everyone, it's just too much, because it's government spends, but it's future generations, the debt goes up. No, I mean, after all, it will be the taxpayer that has to fund this, or inflation, debt, etc., and macro instability. So therefore, sequencing is very important. You give a demand stimulus when supply is resumed. Shops are open so people can go and buy, and then factories start working. They employ.
Can I interrupt there? When you say give a further stimulus when recovery is well underway, shops are open, people are buying, are you simply saying let's wait for the present recovery to improve? In other words, wait 2-3 months? Or are you saying what the chief economic advisor said to FICCI on the 24th? There will be further stimulus, but it will happen when the vaccine comes. The vaccine may not come earlier.
I don't agree with that. I think enough, there is this unlock is progressing. And I don't think the state lockdowns are that serious because they're very localized. And I was talking to someone in a logistics company who says it's not that serious because we can use the internet as a substitute sometimes, and we can work out alternatives for small localized lockdowns. So I don't think so unlock is progressing. More and more shops have opened even in Bombay where lockdown continues. I think the time is ripe for an additional, but there'll be a sequence of packages. I don't think it's all or nothing. Just as the media took the May package to be all and after that nothing, there will be more. So I think that about 2% of GDP they could afford to spend now as a demand stimulus.
You said 3 very important things. First of all, you said the time is ripe for more stimulus. Second, you said there will be a sequence of packages. It won't be all at one go. And thirdly, you said, and I assume this is all together, the government can afford to spend up to 2% of GDP more. So that's all together, all the sequences.
At this stage, I'm saying, at this stage, they can spend 2%.
And I assume that the first of those packages should be now, in the next week or so.
Yes, I think this is we could ride on that. People will be and put hands for. Of course, this stimulus will have to be carefully divided between because the other issue is this DBT they tried, but people do precautionary savings when they're uncertain. So much of that money was not spent, even though it went to the very poor. So I've been advocating temporary coupons. I mean, Asian countries have been trying that. You give a coupon which you have to spend in say 3 months. So and there's a festive season also. And then kind of urban MG Nariga version, say job offers to get migrants back also, to give them the surety they can get some kind of, and you use it for COVID related work. You use their services for COVID.
So these are temporary cash coupons that are given to people, and they know they have to spend it in 3 months. So there's a disinclination to save it, which ensures that what happened with Jan Dhan 500 rupee deposits, which have been saved and not spent, won't happen with this. Is that right?
Yeah, right.
And that is something you believe should be a central part of the first package whenever the first package is announced.
Yeah.
That also suggests to me
that is a way to ensure it's spent, not saved.
And
that is why
it also suggests that you believe the direction of the first package should be to enhance consumption. Because you're giving
No,
them.
no, I'm saying that it should be a mix of things. Part of it should go for infrastructure spending. A lot of these projects are stalled. The more labor-intensive types, there's a demand for better housing and so on. Poor housing for the poor. Restart some of those things that are stalled with this money, because that also, it goes out in wages. Then I think some money could go to small and medium industries, because this loan warranty, only 10% of SMEs get loans from banks. So for the others, some sort of payment conditional on employment. So they're employing, they're producing, and those who get wages are spending it like that. So not all to be spent on coupons.
With a condition on employment. So in other words, by those MSCs that accept this money have to guarantee they will keep employing.
They will employ, use it.
That's a sort of variant. That's a variant of what Rishi Sunak did. He also guaranteed people salaries provided the employers kept them employed. You're suggesting something vaguely similar. Let me end by putting this to you. I'm coming back to that statement made by the chief economic advisor, which created consternation and confusion, and you were very good and honest in saying you don't agree with it. But that statement seemed to suggest that the government is waiting for the right time before it puts in further stimulus. And the thought in my mind is time on the government side?
Yeah, I told you that I believe sequencing is important. You spend that money when it will be more effective. And I think that this kind of limited and well-targeted and temporary stimulus will be effective now. You don't have to wait for the vaccine, which could be 6 months to 1 year, because we are having an unlock, gradual unlock, and more shops are open. People are going out. In some areas, you see, people are back in the shops and so on. Even the malls are opening in Bombay now.
Okay.
So, and this is the festive season. This is the right time to give that stimulus.
That's absolutely clear. The unlock is underway. Shops are opening. You quote the example of Bombay. This is the time for the first of the sequence packages. We don't need to. We should not wait for the vaccine. That is perhaps as much as a year away. It might even be further. That's absolutely perfectly clear. I want to thank you, Professor Goyal, for the time you've given us, for agreeing to this interview. And in particular, I want to personally thank you for permitting me to persuade you to do the interview. You were reluctant, but I'm very grateful you've agreed. Thank you very much.
As I said, you're very persuasive, so I enjoyed it. I like this format where I can explain a little. Otherwise you have those very short panels and where you just say something you can't explain.
I'm delighted you enjoyed it. I promise you I will be knocking on your door before too long as well.
I'm a bit busy,
Till then, Professor Goyal, take care and stay safe.
Thank you. Same to you. Thank you. All the best. Bye.
Thank you.
To receive instant updates on all videos from The Wire, click the subscribe button and hit the bell icon. Pay to support independent journalism. Click the link in the description and choose the amount you want to pay.